My parents chose to attend my sister's housewarming party instead of my wedding because I refused to invite her after she hit me. Now, my grandparents will walk me down the aisle. From an early age, I knew that my parents loved my older sister, Vicky, more than me. She was a planned child, while I was the result of an unexpected pregnancy just 10 months after her birth. Perhaps they didn't even want me, but they decided to keep the pregnancy. My maternal grandparents had passed away before I was born, but my paternal grandparents were alive and took an active role in raising me. Grandma and Grandpa became my support system, giving me the love and encouragement I often lacked from my own parents. I remember many instances when my parents left me with my grandparents while taking Vicky with them on trips. As a child, I didn't mind much because I enjoyed spending time with my grandparents. However, when I turned 6 or 7, I started to realize how unfair it was. The problem wasn't just with my parents, but also with Vicky herself. While I didn't hate her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an unwelcome addition to the family. Vicky knew this too, and made it her mission to make me feel like an outsider in my own home. She constantly competed for our parents' attention, even in the smallest achievements. It was an endless battle for recognition, and I always ended up on the losing side because, no matter what, our parents always favored her. This made me feel inadequate, and my sister and I could never find common ground. Our relationship resembled a never-ending competition where she always came out on top. One day, Vicky wanted to befriend a group of girls, but was too shy to approach them. I knew one of those girls from art class, so she introduced me to the rest of the group, and we started hanging out together. Vicky became so jealous that she made our parents talk to me and demand that I include her in our group. Every time I planned to go somewhere with these girls, Mom called me selfish, and Dad reminded me that Vicky was my sister and that I should take care of her. Reluctantly, I agreed and introduced her to the group. However, Vicky never had many friends and could be overly intrusive at times. She constantly tried to impress the girls, but often came across as awkward. Despite her efforts, she never managed to fit in, and the tension between her and the girls was palpable. For example, one of the girls had a crush on a boy, and Vicky decided to approach him and tell him about her feelings. The boy laughed because he wasn't interested and spread the word, which greatly embarrassed the girl. After that, the girls firmly told me they didn't want Vicky joining our meetups anymore, and I agreed. Vicky didn't take this well. She threw a tantrum when she found out the girls didn't want to hang out with her, and complained to our parents, insisting that, as her sister, I should take her side and stop spending time with those mean girls. I refused and told her it was her own fault the girls didn't want to be friends with her. But, as usual, my parents sided with her. They lectured me about how Vicky didn't mean any harm, and that I should try convincing the girls to forgive her. And if they refused, I was expected to stop being friends with them altogether. I stood my ground and refused. I enjoyed spending time with those girls, and unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to jeopardize my friendships. I told my parents I'd had enough, and that it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents were furious and didn't speak to me for weeks, but I'm glad I didn't back down. Those girls remain my closest friends to this day. They're like sisters to me. We've laughed, cried, and shared some of life's most important moments together. However, back then, it was tough to stand my ground. There were moments when I doubted whether prioritizing my own happiness over my parents' expectations was the right thing to do. This wasn't the only incident that fueled Vicky's hatred for me. There was another situation involving a boy she liked. I didn't even know she liked him. We sat together in some classes at school and became friends. He asked me to prom, but I politely declined since I was already planning to go with a boy I liked. When Vicky found out, she threw a huge fit, accusing me in front of our parents of always taking what she wanted. She claimed I had been flirting with this boy for months on purpose. She hurled countless insults at me, and even told our parents she regretted having me as her sister. Mom sided with her, saying I was in the wrong and that, as her sister, I should have respected the girl code. I tried to explain that I wasn't interested in that guy at all, and had turned him down so Vicky could feel free to ask him out. But Vicky wasn't going to calm down. I think she understood that the guy would reject her anyway, so she just took out her anger on me for being the one he invited instead of her. One day, Dad invited me out for ice cream, saying he wanted to spend some one-on-one time with me. That had never happened before, and I was excited. However, he soon began asking strange questions. If I was using contraception, if the guy I was dating came from a good family, and whether we were drinking or using substances. I was shocked and asked him what he was implying. That's when Dad told me that Vicky had been telling my parents for months that I was using drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. It was a complete lie. I showed Dad my phone to prove that Vicky was making it all up. Later, when he directly confronted her about these accusations, she tried to justify herself, saying that at our age, nobody just friends, a guy, and she claimed I was hiding something. I was furious. I yelled at her for creating unnecessary drama and told her it wasn't my fault that she didn't have a boyfriend. I told her to stay out of my life. Vicky didn't like that and hit me. It was so unexpected, as she had never shown physical aggression before. My nose started bleeding, and I fell to the floor, clutching my face in pain. My parents took me to the hospital, begging me the entire time not to press charges against Vicky. They kept saying it would ruin her life. I sat in the back seat, holding my hand to my face. Vicky didn't show a shred of remorse or even apologize. Later, when the nurse asked me what had happened, I told her the truth, and she called Child Protective Services. My parents were furious that I had involved them. They saw it as a betrayal of the family. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were just a one-time accident that didn't deserve such drastic measures. They begged the social workers to believe them, claiming Vicky wasn't a threat to me and that her behavior was uncharacteristic. In the end, Vicky was allowed to stay but was given a warning, and my parents were told that the family would be monitored in case anything else happened to me. Understandably, Vicky was terrified, as were my parents. Later, my parents told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mom started crying, saying that I was tearing the family apart. My dad was full of reproach, questioning my decision to let the situation escalate so far. I firmly told them that I no longer wanted to see Vicky in my life. They reluctantly agreed. I felt a little guilty for involving Child Protective Services, but for the first time in a long time, I felt safe in my own home. After Vicky's official warning, my parents had a private conversation with her, and from that day on, she stopped talking to me. I preferred it much more than her constant attacks and attempts to meddle in my life. When my grandparents heard about the incident, they asked me to pack my things and move in with them to finish school. They informed my parents, who didn't object, so I moved in with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' house, I felt safe and surrounded by love at my grandparents' home. The rest of my school years went well, and I have warm memories of that time and my friends. During all that time, my parents never visited or called me. I knew they were happy with their favorite daughter, so I never tried to contact them. It was painful to realize how easily they could cut me out of their lives as if I meant nothing to them. At my high school graduation, my parents showed up only for Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or come near me. I felt like a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there, and they scolded my parents for their blatant favoritism. I don't know what exactly Grandpa said to them, but later, my dad awkwardly came up to me and congratulated me on finishing school. Soon after, I found out I had been accepted into a good college with a full scholarship. I was overjoyed, but the thought of needing financial help from my parents scared me. I told my grandparents about it, and they suggested celebrating at a nice restaurant. After dinner, Grandma posted pictures of me on Facebook with a long post about how proud she was of me and my achievements. Our relatives saw it and began sending their congratulations. I think some of our relatives may have reached out to my parents, who, it turns out, didn't know anything about my achievements. Instead of being happy for me, my mom called the next day to tell me that Vicky had locked herself in her room and was crying because she hadn't been accepted to any colleges yet. Mom accused me of intentionally making Vicky feel worse about her grades by telling all our relatives about my success. She said it was my fault because, after the incident with Child Protective Services, Vicky supposedly fell into depression, which led to her poor grades. It hurt so much to hear that my own mother could blame me for something like that. It was the first time I had spoken to her in a very long time. My grandparents helped me move into my college dorm. Since my high school boyfriend's college was far from mine, we broke up. The breakup was hard, but I was excited to meet new people. That's when I met Rob. We were both freshmen and spent half of our days in the library. Rob was unlike anyone I'd met before. His calm demeanor and love for studying matched my own qualities, and we quickly bonded over our shared passion for academics. Over time, our friendship grew into something more, and I realized I had feelings for him that went beyond just friendship. Being a fairly straightforward person, I told him how I felt. To my surprise, he admitted he felt the same way. We started dating, and now we've been together for 8 years. My grandparents met Rob and absolutely adore him. I also got to know Rob's parents, who treat me like their own daughter. Rob's mom has even confessed to me that she always dreamed of having a daughter, so she's glad Rob found someone like me. Honestly, it's the first time I've been surrounded by a family that truly loves me and doesn't hold any resentment toward me. I've shared stories of my childhood with Rob, and he always listens with understanding and empathy. In the past 8 years, my parents have barely kept in touch. Occasionally, they'd send a birthday message, if they remembered at all, but that was the extent of it. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed while we were watching the sunrise at our favorite spot. It felt like a fairy tale. He was so nervous asking the big question, and I had no hesitation when I said yes. I posted pictures of the engagement on Instagram and immediately told my grandparents. They were so happy for us and congratulated us on the new chapter of our lives. Somehow, the news reached my parents, who unexpectedly called to congratulate me. I thought it was just a friendly call since we hadn't spoken in years. They asked about my life, my job, and my apartment, but then my dad suddenly asked if he could walk me down the aisle. I was stunned by the sudden question, especially since just a few minutes earlier, he didn't even know where I worked. I replied that I hadn't thought about it yet. Dad said it would be awkward if he didn't do it, and people might start asking questions. According to him, it would be better if he was the one to give me away. I smirked and told them I wasn't even sure if I'd invite them to the wedding since we hadn't maintained any contact. This upset them. Mom started talking about how disappointed she was in my response, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She kept insisting that they would always be my parents, no matter what, and that I should let the past stay in the past. Part of me wanted to listen to them and accept Dad's offer because I genuinely wanted to mend our relationship. But another part of me hesitated, afraid of facing disappointment and pain again. However, I was starting a new chapter in my life, and I told Dad that he could walk me down the aisle. He seemed pleased with this. During the wedding preparations, I reached out to my old school friends, with whom I had stayed in touch despite the distance and our different careers. I told them I wanted our group to come together again and asked if they would be my bridesmaids. There were lots of happy tears and congratulations, and they didn't hesitate to accept my invitation to be part of such an important day for me. My friends and I decided to go to Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party, while Rob had a separate bachelor party with his friends. We posted lots of pictures from the party and had an amazing time. However, when I got back home, my parents called to express their disappointment that I hadn't invited Vicky to the celebration. I told them I would never invite Vicky to my bachelorette party, and that I didn't want her to be part of my life. This surprised my parents, and they asked what I meant. I explained that Vicky's actions, especially her lies and betrayal, had left deep scars and completely destroyed my trust in her. I couldn't even imagine inviting her to such a personal and joyful event as my bachelorette party, knowing her presence would only cast a shadow over it. I told my parents that Vicky wouldn't be invited to my wedding. Upon hearing this, they became furious. They started yelling that I had no right to exclude my own sister from the wedding. They said that Vicky was eagerly anticipating seeing me after hearing about my wedding. I was baffled and asked my parents why they assumed I'd want to see her, especially since we hadn't spoken in years. But they simply ignored my question and said, "That's not how sisters should behave." I replied, "I understand what you mean, but you need to understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated. After everything that happened, I just don't feel comfortable inviting her to my wedding, especially since she's never even apologized for what she's done." However, as usual, my parents dismissed my words. Mom kept saying that she just wanted the family to be happy, and that inviting Vicky wasn't such a big deal. Dad insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister wasn't invited, and that it would cast a shadow over my wedding. But I knew I couldn't give in to their demands, so I stood firm. I told them I didn't care if people talked behind my back or judged my character, as long as I was surrounded by people I loved and who loved me in return. Mom asked if my fiancé would approve of this decision, and went on to say that my future in-laws would likely judge me for being so cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and told my parents that my fiancé and his family knew about our family issues and didn't care whether Vicky was at the wedding or not. They continued to pressure me to reconsider, emphasizing the importance of family unity and forgiveness, but I remained steadfast. I wasn't willing to sacrifice my well-being to please others. In the end, we agreed to disagree and ended the conversation. My parents said they needed time to think about it. I later shared this with my grandparents because I felt a bit guilty for standing so firmly against my parents. My grandparents fully supported me. They told me I shouldn't feel obligated to invite anyone I didn't want to see at my celebration, and that my parents were simply trying to guilt-trip me, as they always did. After that conversation, I felt a little better and threw myself into wedding preparations, which were fast approaching. Last week, my dad called me and said that after much thought, he and Mom had decided they wouldn't attend my wedding. Before I could even react, he added that this also meant he wouldn't walk me down the aisle. I asked if there was a specific reason for this, and he explained that Vicky was moving into a new house soon, a house they had helped her find, and since I hadn't invited her to my wedding, she had decided to host her housewarming party on the same day. They chose to attend her housewarming instead of my wedding. Shock and disbelief washed over me as I processed what my dad had just said. The realization that my sister's housewarming party was more important to them than their own daughter's wedding was a bitter pill to swallow. It only deepened the pain and sense of betrayal I'd felt for years. I simply told my dad, "I understand," and hung up the phone. While I tried to appear strong during the call, the pain of their rejection was indescribable. When I told Rob about it, he was furious at how heartless my parents were, especially after they had been the ones insisting on inviting Vicky. He suggested that I ask my grandfather to walk me down the aisle instead, given that my grandparents had been there for me far more than my parents ever were. I agreed and called my grandparents to ask if they would be willing to walk me down the aisle on my wedding day. Tears welled up in my eyes as I spoke, overwhelmed by how much they meant to me. "You've always been there for me," I said, barely holding back the tremor in my voice. "You weren't just grandparents, you were like parents to me. I can't imagine anyone else beside me on such an important day." Without a moment's hesitation, they said yes. They told me it would be an honor to walk me down the aisle and reassured me that, unlike my parents, they would never let me down. Their words brought me comfort, and for the first time, I felt a deep sense of relief and peace. With my grandparents by my side, I knew I had a family who loved me unconditionally and accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. I also spoke with my future in-laws, and Rob's parents assured me that they didn't care at all whether my parents attended the wedding. They were happy to support us and share this special day, regardless of my parents' presence. 2 days before the wedding, I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. Thinking something serious had happened, I called him back. When he answered, the first thing he asked was whether it was true that my grandparents would be walking me down the aisle. I confirmed that it was true. At that, he erupted into yelling, accusing me of being disrespectful for asking my grandparents to take on the role. I reminded him that he had declined to attend the wedding in the first place, so I didn't understand why this upset him so much. Dad continued to shout, claiming that he and Mom were only trying to make me realize I was wrong and that their refusal to come was meant to teach me a lesson. He continued to say that he and Mom were the ones who raised me, fed me, and paid for my education, and that Grandma and Grandpa had no right to replace them. I tried to explain to him that my grandparents were there for me during so many moments when he and Mom weren't, but he refused to listen. He also said that I had pushed everyone away myself, and that everything happening now was entirely my fault. After this conversation, I couldn't help but wonder if I really had done something wrong. Well, let's pause this story for a moment, and I suggest you answer the question posed by the author, and we'll continue after that. Update 1. Wow, I didn't expect my post to get so many comments. I've read through countless pieces of advice and suggestions on how to handle this situation. I agree with those who say I need to completely cut ties with my parents because their constant manipulation and unpredictability have been exhausting for far too long. But how can a child simply stop loving their parents? It's much easier to talk about it than to actually do it. Still, for the sake of my peace of mind, I have no choice but to take this step and fully enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. Sorry for the lack of updates. I've been quite busy since the wedding. First of all, yes, the wedding was wonderful. My grandparents walked me down the aisle, and despite my parents' absence, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy as I exchanged vows with Rob, promising to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced the night away, and I can't stress enough how important it is to maintain connections with childhood friends. Sometimes, they become your true family. During the reception, I did feel a twinge of sadness knowing my parents weren't there to share this special moment with me, especially as I watched Rob's parents and relatives give heartfelt speeches. But I found solace in knowing that I had made the right decision to prioritize my well-being and happiness. Some of my friends also gave speeches, sharing memories of our time together, and the bond that has supported us through both joyous and difficult times. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went on our honeymoon, which his parents generously paid for as a wedding gift. I spent that time savoring the relaxation and the company of my husband. Every time I look at Rob and realize he is now my husband, I feel a deep sense of happiness. As I mentioned before, I've cut all ties with my parents. I blocked them entirely, leaving them to live their lives with their favorite daughter. Update 3. I wasn't planning on posting another update, but something unexpected happened. I hadn't checked my email for an entire month because I was busy with the wedding and honeymoon. Today, as I sorted through my messages, I came across an email from Vicky. I have no idea how she found my email address, and I was completely stunned. I hesitated. Should I open it or just delete it without reading? But curiosity got the better of me, so I clicked on it. Inside was a long message from Vicky, where she expressed regret over our strained relationship and her desire to mend it. She admitted to the mistakes she made in the past, acknowledging that she had been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for the pain she had caused me over the years, and sincerely expressed her wish to make things right. She wrote that she was happy for me and wished me all the best. At the end of the email, she begged me not to punish our parents by completely cutting them off, insisting that they miss me. As I read her words, I felt a mix of emotions, surprise and skepticism. Part of me wanted to believe that Vicky had truly changed, that she was genuinely remorseful and ready to work on repairing our relationship. But another part of me remained cautious because I still don't trust her. Regardless of what she wrote, I know for certain that my parents don't miss me. If they did, they wouldn't have treated me the way they did for all these years. I thought about replying to her, but decided not to. After all, forgiveness isn't something instantaneous. It's a process that takes time and reflection. While I'm unsure if I'm ready to forgive Vicky, I don't want to burn all bridges completely. She's the only one who has found the strength to apologize, after all. Honestly, after the wedding, I no longer feel alone. I've learned to value what I do have: a loving husband, loyal friends, and the unconditional love of my grandparents. With their support, I know I can face any challenges that come my way without needing Vicky or my parents. Additionally, I've already found a great therapist and scheduled my first session. I've taken this step to deal with the pain of the past, heal old wounds, and finally move forward. So let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Personally, I'm glad that Vicky at least apologized, but like the author, I'm not sure if her apologies were sincere. What do you think? Would you try to talk to Vicky or not? Share your opinions in the comments, and feel free to share your own stories as well. It'll be interesting to read them. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means so much to me. Take care.